Every great mythology begins with a central theme, and the theme is the sphere, the oneness. First, we were one. And next in the mythology is the bifurcation, the splitting of the one. So you have the knowledge of good and evil, the upward and downward direction. You have separation from the one. Now, in order for recreation to occur, in order for diversity, for individuality, for new life to emerge, there has to be a separation. Meaning if the one never splits, then the isness and the oneness is. It's pre-language because language lies in the split. When you call this a hand and this a ring, you're splitting the one into hand and into ring. And so in the unconscious one, you have pre-thought, pre-language. You have unity. And then there is the split. And that split is part of new life. It's what gives rise to the possibility of sex, of polarities coming together in order to form something new. Now, the descent into the one creates pain. All pain is separation from and longing for. If I long to be with my lover and I am separate from my lover, there will be a certain amount of pain. If I long to be in the womb, one with mother, and I am separate from mother, I no longer belong, there is pain. So the original pain is born out of the separation. Separation from the whole, from the oneness, from the interconnectedness of all that is, and the longing for that interconnectedness, that wholeness. To heal the pain is to heal the gap between that which is separate and the one. So in the birth process of new life, you have a slow separation as you become more and more distinct. In order to give birth to new life, you become more and more distinct. You become more and more separate. As one moves farther and farther away, one could also say one is getting smaller and smaller, more and more distinct. First, one is separate from the one. If one further individuates, meaning becomes a unique individual, one then separates from one's cult or culture. And now you are even more separate. If one truly individuates, one separates from one's family. This is the way the family does it, but this is the way I do it. And again, one moves farther and farther into distinction, into separation from the family, from the community, from the culture, from the earth, in terms of as the human ego is given birth and formed, we are, of course, always interconnected with our ecology. That interconnection is scientific. We cannot take a breath without the gift of air from the ecology. We cannot take a drink without the gift of water from the ecology, from the larger self, from the larger pattern of energy out of which we are emerging. So water, food, even thought. How can you think without language? How can you develop language as a single person? So there's the constant connection with the whole, with the one, with the family, with the culture. But we're moving away. We're moving into the distinction, the finiteness of the individual that is defined with separation. It is defined with distinction. The thumb is defined on the continuum of color as being distinct from the sweater. On the continuum of temperature, this temperature is different from this temperature, or this temperature, or the temperature in the past. So there's a gradual moving away into more and more finiteness, more and more distinction. And the further we move away, the more pain there is, because pain is the separation from and the longing for. And every consciousness, every individual, at some level, longs to reconnect with the whole, longs to rejoin the circle. That on some level, it has never left, because the one includes the many. The planet includes every single individual species and life form on the planet. On some level, there is no disconnection. The laws of physics, the laws of time, the laws of mathematics connect everything to everything, connect everyone to everyone else in multiple ways. But as we focus our attention on that which is unique and distinctive about us as an individual, we lose awareness of our interconnectedness. And in that separation, in that perception of distinction, there is pain, the separation from and the longing for. Now, all fear is fear of pain, meaning there's some part of us that does not want to be isolated, that does not want to be disconnected. And it creates the original pain. When that pain gets too big to digest and understand, we fear that pain. We have the fear of the pain that we experienced in the past, that we anticipate feeling again in the future. And we don't want to feel the pain in the future. And so we fear the pain in the past repeating itself in the future. If you dissolve the future, if you eliminate time, there's no fear. All fear is of pain in the future. All fear is of the future. It is anticipation of pain. So with the creation of separation, the experience of time grows. One can look at this, for example, in a very crude analogy of a CD or Blu-ray disc. That every single frame, every single image, 750,000 or so images on a normal feature-length movie, they're all on the disc. And that's synonymous with the sense of being one. It was never separate. The beginning of the movie, the middle of the movie, the end of the movie, this frame, that frame, it's all there. But as we narrow attention, as we narrow the laser beam of reading images down to a single frame, now we've created time. There was no time on the disc because it was all happening at once. But as we zero into a single frame and then move our attention to another frame and then move our attention to another frame, we now have a memory, a recollection of that frame, a recollection of that frame, and an awareness of this frame. And we have an anticipation built up over time and experience to say that usually, after playing a lot of movies, normally, when a fast-moving truck is coming towards someone and someone walks out in front of it, normally the next thing that happens is splat. The truck collides with the individual. And so we have the anticipation of the future based on what has happened the other times that we've seen people interact with fast-moving vehicles. So we have a sense of the future based on imagination and extrapolation from the past. And then the future happens, and then it is the present. And as the present happens, sometimes it confirms and affirms what was happening in the past, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes something new happens, and we learn that new instant braking has been invented that made that seemingly imminent collision not happen. So we have the creation of time by identifying with the particle, with a piece of the whole, which is then in a relationship with every other part of the whole. And as that relationship progresses through the landscape of time, we have the experience of time. Now, what is separating? When we talk about the separation from the whole, what is separating? And it's our identity. The physics of the universe dictate that everything that's going on in this body is inextricably connected to every other body, to every other particle in the universe, the multiverse, the planet, the solar system. Physics teaches us that no energy is created or destroyed. It simply changes form. And it changes form in relationship with every other energy form. That is the fabric of connection. That one thing affects another thing, affects another thing, affects another thing, because it is connected. So the disconnection that is perceived is the separation or distinction of identity. Identity, identity, is the sense of self. Now, it's self-evident that I identify with my identity. But what is that identity that I'm identifying with? Well, it's a pattern of energy. It's a pattern of energy that I experience being distinct from every other pattern of energy. And the pattern of energy, the identity, occurs within the framework or dimensions of awareness. So, what am I aware of? That's my identity. Identity is mental, emotional, and physical. That's what I identify with. My body is physical, my actions are physical, my feelings are emotional. They're also physical, meaning that you can correlate feelings with brain activity and body activity, such that if you induce certain brain activities, for example, if you put an electrode in the brain in a certain area, you may start laughing. Put it there again, stimulate it a little bit, and you laugh. So, laughter can come from a thought. So there's a connection between a thought and a sense of what we call funny, and then the body laughing. So we are again creating artificial distinctions between mind or thinking, feeling, and mental, emotional, physical. Thinking, feeling, doing, and being. There's not really a name for the habit of our bodies, but our bodies are habits. Habits of different muscle postures, habits of doing things, habits of adjusting our faces in different ways. And the atoms in our body are also part of a habit, meaning our body doesn't just suddenly change into a different body with little or no time. It's a habit. There's a relationship of habits. Habits of the physical body, and also habits of behavior. And the habitual behavior that we engage with affects our body, and our body affects the physical behavior. In other words, there's a relationship. This goes to this point, is changed by its interacting with here, and then this goes to this point and is changed by this interaction here, and then it goes back to this point. So a relationship is a series of relays. It's a series of feedback loops. It's a series of interactions. And all interactions change that which is being interacted with in some way. Some interactions it's very fast, some it's very slow. But it changes. A gasoline motor spinning at 3,600 revolutions per minute slowly changes the components involved in that relationship. Even with lubrication, the engine head and the pistons will slowly affect each other's relationship. Water flowing over a mountaintop will slowly take even the most dense stone and over time round the edges. The stone affects the water, which relates to it, and the water affects the stone. The habit of eating affects the body, and the body affects one's thoughts and one's feelings. One might have more sluggish thoughts after eating meat, potatoes, and apple pie. It affects the thoughts, and as the thoughts come down more, it affects the feelings. So we use these distinctions to bring awareness to different regions in the whole. And the deeper we go into the distinction, the more distinct and separate each part feels from the whole, to the point that our experience of a thought is of being distinct and independent from the feelings and the body that influenced, that generated that thought. Meaning, if there is no feeling and no corresponding chemical spark in the brain, that thought doesn't get created. There's a spark in the body, produces a feeling that directs our attention into a certain arena, and we give birth to a thought. We become aware of a thought. And it seems separate, just like we seem to be separate from the planet, just like the planet seems to be separate from the solar system, which seems to be separate from, and on and on and on. It seems that way when we're deep in the awareness of the distinction that is the identity, which we know who we are because our body does and feels the same way it did before. Our body is a habit in what seems like a very dense form of energy. In fact, our body is made up of 99% space because our body is made up of atoms. And an atom is a relationship between a proton and an electron that's in a dance, that's in a habitual dance. An atom is a habit of two things in relationship with one another. And the space between that habitual dance is much bigger than the particles that are dancing. And our body is composed of that habit. When we're trying to figure out who we are, we think in terms of our identity. We think in terms of our habit of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and I'll just call the physical body being. So if I look into the mirror and I say, I've seen that habit before. I've seen that color habit. I've seen that movement habit. I've heard that voice habit before. And I always see that habit when I look in the mirror. It must be me. That's me, the one who is that way again. And again, when I look at my identity, I look at what I'm thinking today. Is this me, or is this somebody else's thoughts? And I look around and I think, I thought that thought yesterday, or I was thinking this thought yesterday, and then I thought this thought, and then that thought led to this thought. So yes, I am the one thinking this thought because I was the one thinking that thought which led to this thought. I am in this place because I took this step, and then this step, and then this step, and here I am in this place. I identify with being in this place, and it makes sense to me because I did this and this and this and this and this and this, and then that led me here. And so here's where I am. I'm in this moment in time, in this place, in this body, thinking these thoughts, feeling these feelings, saying these things. All of that's me. And there's a natural progression. There's a relationship between current me and past me. There's also a relationship between current me and future me. Meaning my expectations, based on the trajectory, if I'm walking towards a volcano and it gets hotter every step, then my future that I project is, if I'm continuing with the intention of getting hotter and hotter, then I'm anticipating that future me will be hot and I might be disoriented. What's going on? Why has it suddenly gotten cold if I'm moving towards a volcano? And then I will expand my awareness to say, oh, there's a cold wind coming to counteract that. I am in now relationship not just with the heat of the volcano, but I'm also in a relationship with the cold wind. And so the wind is now colder and more intense, so I've gotten colder, but all things being equal, I still expect to be warmer as I get closer to the volcano. Our identity is our unique habit of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. In a context, in a relationship of time and space that help us to orient where we are in that journey of identity. But the identity, this is me doing this, feeling this, thinking this, speaking this, be with a body like this, is unique. It is a unique particle in the whole, meaning no one else is standing exactly where we're standing at exactly this moment in the density of the physical body. No one else is standing exactly here at this moment in time, thinking these thoughts, feeling this. In other words, I am completely and utterly distinct through the lens of identity. And in that distinction lies complete and utter separation. And in that separation there is a certain pain, the separation from and the longing for wholeness, for healing. Healing what? Healing the illusion of separation. Because while I'm occupying this identity, the larger identity, the larger ecology, the larger pattern of relationship of which I am an inextricable part, still exists. Meaning if I identify with the whole, if I identify with the species or with the planet or with all physical matter, then this particle, this unique identity is contained within that, is not separate, is integral. When we look at reality mathematically, we see that it is an inextricably linked series of equations. So when we look at reality mathematically, we see all the different equations that each affect the total. Meaning the equation can be a billion units long, 1 plus 3 minus 2 multiplied by 8 times 237 times 75%. The equation can be as long as infinity, but we are a part of the equation. We are a part on the dimension of weight. So if you do an equation of the planet based on weight, and suddenly we leave the planet weighs 175 pounds less than it did while we were here, all things being equal. The planet is not the same in weight. The planet is not the same in resources. The planet is not the same in the electrical field because we produce a very small electrical field in our brain. The future is different if we are not here or if we are here, because we are a unique pattern that affects the equation. The equation is different. The economy is different. The politics are different. The norms are different. In other words, we have impact on the entirety of the equation. Now, it's a very small impact if you measure an entire planet and the electrical field with us here and without us here, the economy with us here and without our here. It's even smaller if you measure the entire universe and then deduct one identity, one dog, one human, one. It changes, but in scale, but the inextricable relationship is still there on every single dimension. But the perception of the consciousness that looks out through the identity, the ego, is of separation. Death and the fear of death emerge as we identify with a singular pattern. The individual, by definition, is singular. It is individuated. It is perceived as distinct from all other patterns. Every human being is in some way unique, is in some way distinct from every other human being, from every other species, from every other thing that ever has been, exists, or will exist. The uniqueness is innate. All things change. All things die with change. All identity dies. Energy does not die. No energy is created or destroyed. It simply changes form, and as it changes form, it changes identity. All energy exists in relationship with all energy. All patterns of energy, all identity exists in relationship with all other patterns of energy, with all other identities. But the fear of death emerges as we completely and fully identify with this pattern of energy that we are now, and experience a relationship with a larger pattern of energy that changes the identity to such an extent that we can no longer identify with it. It's called trauma from the ego's point of view. trauma is a large pattern of energy colliding with our identity that, in that collision, threatens the sense of self, threatens the identity. And we go through the grief of the loss of identity. We go through the pain of the original pain being the separation from and longing for wholeness, for being one with all that is. The ego pain is the pain of being separate from itself. I long to be the person I identify with being. I long to be that, and I cannot hold on to it. I long to I identify with in my mind. I long for feeling 26 years old, but as time goes on, I cannot hold on to that vitality that I long for, that I identify with. And so you have the fear of death. You have the fear of pain, the separation from and the longing for. And the experience of trying to hold on to this form of energy, to this identity, and losing it, that trauma, that pain, that loss of cohesion, to where we lose our pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being. We lose the pattern as another energy collides with that pattern. And we experience the fear of loss of our identity. Because a relationship with another human being, a relay of energy, establishes a pattern. I say this, she says that. I say this, she says that. I say this, she laughs. And that happens repeatedly. I know this pattern of relationship. But as her pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being disintegrates in a car accident, in a plane accident, in terminal illness, in death, as her pattern of energy loses cohesion and disintegrates and becomes part and is absorbed into the larger pattern, as her pattern is dissolved, is lost, the pattern that I was able to hold in relationship with her is also lost. I can't cuddle something that's not there. I can't talk to someone that is no longer listening. I can't react to something, to a pattern of energy that isn't there. So I feel grief, I feel loss of my own identity. I am changed by that loss. Now, as a new distinct life form, you can think of an oak tree seedling. An acorn falls. It is distinct, at least from our observing and measuring devices, it is distinct from the tree. And a new seedling is forming. That is, again, a distinct identity, not necessarily of thinking and feeling, but of being and acting. It is a new identity. And in its fragile and early state, a single step, a single high heel grinding into that new acorn seedling can disrupt the pattern. It takes very little when an identity is very small. It takes very little to see that identity. It takes very little to destroy that pattern, and it is lost. When that happens or threatens to happen for an ego, there is the sense that I am dying, that I am threatened. And when we are completely identified with our pattern, the feeling is that I will cease to exist. And of course, what comes into being as I cease to exist is another identity. But that identity is unknown. That identity is out there. I don't know what that is. And so there is the sense of fear, the fear of separation from our identity. So there's a fragile stage. As our identity, if it is a successful identity, now a successful identity partners with its environment, meaning a successful identity has a constructive relationship with other energy patterns around it. And as a result of partnering in some way, we have increased odds of survival and growth. Abraham Maslow identifies survival, security, love, and belonging as the first in the three hierarchy of human needs. Once I identify with being in this body, I need this body to survive. As soon as that need is met, I need to feel security that this identity will continue. And as soon as I have that need met, I need love and belonging, which anchors the first two needs. Because if you have love and belonging, and you understand that love is a partnering of sorts, you now have a larger pattern of energy invested in your survival and security than you did if you had no love. Love is an investment, a nourishment of the identity. When someone loves you, they love your pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing, and being. And when someone loves your identity, there is energy extended to support that identity in growing. Love nourishes and increases the odds of survival of an identity that is loved. And so we need that for our identity to survive, so that our identity can grow. Now, every human being in the history of humanity has wanted to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse as a distinct identity. And that distinction is a deep part of nature's code. Because, truly so, we could remain pretty much complete copies of our parents, who could be complete copies of their parents and the larger culture, who could be complete copies of the species. We all think and feel and do the same thing at the same time in the same way for the same reasons within the same paradigm. But we want to leave home. We want to find our own unique identity. We want to find our pattern. And having found that pattern, often as with the initial separation from the whole, you have vulnerability, meaning the more distinct your identity is, the more vulnerable it is, because it is so unique. And so if it stops existing, a truck, a plane, a fatal illness, it is no more, which means as long as you identify with that, you are no more. So you have the fear of loss of self on the one hand, and you have the fear of loss of the whole on the other. So you have a polarity of pain. As you lose the relationship with the whole to become an identity, there's the pain, the separation from, and the longing for wholeness. And as you lose your relationship with your individual identity to expand back into a relationship or an identity of wholeness, there is the fear of loss, there is the pain of losing the sense of self. As we have a secure, unique identity, as we learn to love and cherish our identity, we naturally and gradually move outward, where the empathy with our pattern becomes empathy with a larger pattern, with someone else, with something else. It begins the reestablishment of the individual identity with the larger identity, begins with empathy. A traumatized child resides in the reptilian brain of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. In a sociopathic relationship of fear and pain with the larger ecology that is the abuser, that is the violator, that is the one that is threatening and bullying and clipping the uniqueness of that identity. And so the identity is born in fear of losing itself, and develops defenses and coping mechanisms to protect its unique life form, to bring its unique life form into the world. As that life form evolves, initially in self-preservation, but always wanting to experience sustainable well-being and avoid unnecessary and chronic suffering. As that identity evolves on that continuum with technology, with self-awareness, which is a technology, with language, which is a technology, with systems of thought and behavior, which are technologies. As we evolve through the unique lens of our identity to feel sustainably better and avoid feeling chronically worse, at some point we reach the state of self-love, of competency as an adult, to understand, to empathize with, to cherish, to nurture, and to sustain our identity. And at that point, our attention moves outward because it's more fun to love more, to love others. We move outward on our journey towards sustainable, higher and higher levels of well-being, to love others, to love the world, to love human beings, to love more and more of the energy of which we are a part. But in that initial movement back towards the whole, it's through empathy. And as long as we are in pain, the biggest source of empathy is understanding other people's pain. As long as we're terrified and frightened of pain, our biggest empathy is towards other people's fear of pain. I know how you feel. I'm afraid of pain. And you're similar to me in this way and this way. And you're afraid of pain. And so I can extend my care for my own pain and my own fear to you. As I grow deeper into self-love, I can extend my self-love. If I am valuable and we are interconnected, you are valuable. And so you have a movement towards love, towards empathy. So the return in this circle, which we start off as the one, we move in the unconscious separation from the one, the instinct to make new life, into the conscious distinction and identity of the other. I am me and you are you. I'm not like you, I'm like this. Through the antipathy and into the depth of that separation, we then learn to respond to the pain of that separation, to the fear of that pain, and to love that distinct form. Having mastered that, we move towards, in this circle, we move towards empathy, towards you. But if I can empathize with this and I really understand that, maybe that takes me to understand this and empathize with this. So the cycle of empathy gradually leads to more and more understanding, more and more empathy with more of the whole. Maybe we die and all we've managed is to empathize with ourselves and our children, or another family member who's a bit like us. So we have extended our empathy and our relationship, our identification. Because with empathy, we're expanding what we identify with. If I identify with an entire group, I have empathy for that entire group that mirrors the empathy that I have inside. If I empathize with a species, I identify with that species, because we can only empathize with something we identify with. And so the process of the identity getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and learning to sustain, to survive, to feel secure, and then to create love and belonging for that little identity. The identity starts to grow like a flower opening and gradually includes more and more. It includes more and more people, more and more plants, more and more animals. I get a dog, I love that dog, now I can empathize with other dog owners. I love my dog, now I can empathize and love other dogs. By identifying with those dogs, by identifying with the people who love those dogs. with identifying with the pain of those dog owners who lose those dogs. And so slowly, empathy expands. As we empathize and identify with more and more of reality, we start naturally to partner, to collaborate consciously with more and more of reality. And as the flower opens, as love blossoms, we eventually come to our sense of identifying with and loving all that is, while still having a sense of I. It completes the circle from the unconscious identity of the whole into the separation, the instinctual separation, into the conscious identity through language, through thought, through distinction of me as the smallest possible particle in relationship with everything else, a relationship of pain, a relationship of fear, of that pain, a separate, an insecure identity that could be extinguished at any time. We continue with self-love, with love of others, with collaboration, with more and more parts of reality. And gradually we return to the place that we began, still holding on to the sense of identity that in its germination stage was just a tiny little ego, that anyone who thought differently than this and felt differently than that wasn't me. Through empathy, gradually growing and becoming one again, and identifying as a distinct being who is now one. Another way of communicating this geometrically and mathematically is that we start off with the circle, with the sphere, in which there is no distinction, in which everything is one. And we separate from the sphere to become a line, to become a particle that is now a separate, distinct form, a separate identity. And it's a very black and white, a very simple identity. That's that, and this is me. You have polarity. And slowly over time, the circle cut in half becomes the triangle, becomes the square, becomes the pentagram. And we develop more and more distinctions. And by the time you have 100,000 different lines and particles, and we mature in our awareness, we start to see how each of those particles, how each of those lines fit integrally into the recreation, into the many-dimensional facets of the sphere that we once left. And now we see that sphere again, but rather than seeing it as an unconscious one, we see it as a composition of thousands upon thousands of dots, of thousands upon thousands of planes. And eventually, as we accept all of ourself, we accept all of the whole. as we love all of ourself, we love all of the whole. And the journey is complete. We return to the place that we began as the unconscious one, and we know it for the first time in the dots, in the planes, in the lines that fit together to create that synergy, that whole, that is greater than the sum of the parts, the ecological dance of life that is greater than any single pattern or any single part of the life cycle.